I was sitting at the far end of my dining table that night, watching my son carve into the roast beef his wife had brought. The conversation was light, weather, politics, a little neighborhood gossip. But then, out of nowhere, he laughed, shook his head, and said something that lodged in my chest like a splinter. "You won't be here next year anyway, Dad." The words didn't sound cruel at first. He said them like a joke, grinning, fork in midair. But the look in his eyes wasn't a joke. It was a flicker, quick, calculating, like he just said something that had been sitting in the back of his mind for a while. I put my fork down and asked, "What's that supposed to mean?" He smirked. "Come on, you're 73. The doctors told you about the heart thing. I'm just saying, you should start thinking about the future." I didn't answer, but my appetite vanished. I'd raised this boy alone after his mother passed when he was 15, paid for his college, helped him with the down payment on his first house, even co-signed a loan when his business idea flopped. I'd been proud to do it. He was my son, my only child. But that night, the way he said it, it wasn't concern. It was possession. 2 weeks later, I got the confirmation of what I'd already suspected. I was at my lawyer's office signing routine paperwork when she leaned across the desk and asked, "Have you changed your will recently?" "No." "Why?" She hesitated. "Your son called last week asking about the terms. Said he had your permission." I felt a slow, cold burn in my chest. I told her he did not have my permission. She gave me a careful look, the kind people give when they're not sure if they should tell you something. He asked specifically what would happen if your passing occurred sooner than expected. He wanted to know if probate could be avoided so he could manage the estate efficiently. Manage the estate efficiently. My house. My savings. My truck. The little cabin upstate I'd bought as my retirement escape. That was when I understood my son wasn't waiting for me to die. He was planning for it. I didn't confront him. That would have been giving away the game too soon. Instead, I went quiet. I kept Sunday dinners going, nodded along when he complained about bills or hinted at how expensive the kids' tuition was. I let him think I was still the same trusting, aging father who'd hand him the keys to the kingdom without blinking. But at night, I started making calls. First to my lawyer. We rewrote my will from scratch. Every cent of my savings, every piece of property, every asset, was going to someone else. Not a charity, not a distant cousin. Someone he'd never expect. Second, I called an old friend, Mike, my fishing buddy from the Navy. He'd fallen on hard times after his wife's illness, and I'd helped him here and there over the years. He's a good man. The kind who'd never ask for anything but would be grateful forever if you gave it. I told him I wanted him to have my cabin, my truck, and my savings when I was gone. The rest, my main house and a modest trust, would go to my granddaughter directly, bypassing my son entirely. I didn't stop there. I set up a living trust, meaning my son wouldn't even get the chance to contest it in court. It would all transfer immediately, airtight and legal. The final step? I left just enough in the will for him to know he'd been deliberately excluded. Not nothing, just enough to sting. 3 months later, I invited him and his family over for a barbecue. The sky was clear, the air warm, the smell of hickory smoke drifting over the yard. We sat on the deck, my granddaughter running barefoot through the grass while my son nursed a beer. I waited until after we'd eaten. Then I leaned back in my chair and said, "I had a meeting with my lawyer last week. Got all my affairs in order." He looked up sharply. "Oh yeah." "Yep," I said. "Everything's settled. No confusion when the time comes." He grinned, smug, "Sir. Well, that's good. Saves me the trouble later." I watched him sip his beer, the sun catching the lines in his face. "You know," I said, "you were right back in March. I probably won't be here forever, but I wanted to make sure what I leave behind goes exactly where it's needed." Something in my tone made him put his drink down. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean," I said slowly, "I'm leaving the house to Emily." I nodded toward his daughter. "She'll get it when she's of age. The cabin's going to Mike." And the savings? Well, they're going to people who won't measure my worth in years left. For a second, he just stared at me, as if he'd misheard. Wait, you're giving my daughter the house? What about me? You. I let the word hang. You get my tools. The old set in the garage. His jaw clenched. That's it? After everything I've done for you. I cut him off. After everything I've done for you, son. College. Bailouts. And now, instead of spending what time I have left with respect, you start circling like a vulture. Color rose in his face. His wife was frozen beside him, eyes darting between us. Emily had stopped running, watching quietly from the grass. You can't do this, he said finally, his voice low. I leaned in just enough for him to hear me over the hum of the yard. I already have. He didn't stay for dessert. They left in a storm of slammed car doors and squealing tires. I watched from the porch, the smell of smoke still clinging to my shirt. In the weeks that followed, he called 3 times. Each call was angrier than the last. Accusations, guilt trips, threats of cutting me out of his life. By the 3rd call, I told him calmly, that's your choice. But the will stands. Word must have gotten around. Friends I'd known for years stopped by to check in, some of them clearly fishing for the truth. I told them all the same thing. I wasn't rewarding greed. The last time I saw my son was at Emily's birthday party that fall. He barely spoke to me, but Emily hugged me tight before I left. She whispered, "Thank you, Grandpa." I think she understood more than anyone realized. Now, when I sit on my porch in the evenings, I feel a kind of peace I didn't expect. Not because I cut him out, but because I refuse to let my final years be shaped by someone else's hunger. People say blood is thicker than water. Maybe that's true. But respect, trust, those are thicker than both. And in the end, you only leave behind what you choose.